I've been on a history kick ever since I watched Waterloo not too long ago. I wasn't much into that period until I watched that film, and after watching it, I do think that movie is the standard by which historically based movies should be judged. Waterloo is an immense film, full of historical accuracy, great performances, superb cinematography, and insane battle sequences. It's fantastic in that it covers a fairly small span of history, yet its significance cannot be overstated. This was the end of Napoleon's reign as a European political figure, the last stake through the heart of an empire that rose to heights rarely seen before. Not only did the film accurately depict this, but it was just good on its own merits, even if you don't know the historical context. In my video, I said that history matters, and getting it right in media matters even more, because to portray it any other way does a disservice to the individuals involved in such affairs. Waterloo is a great example of this, in that Napoleon isn't portrayed as cartoonish and comedically short.
You ditched Napoleon?
But I think there's a film that is worth this point as well. Not so much in terms of perfect accuracy, but more as a way of respectfully depicting a conflict. Naturally, this train of thought brought me to another historical battle film. One that's a little more controversial, especially in Britain. Zulu. Zulu is focused on the Battle of Rorke's Drift between the British and the Zulus during the Anglo-Zulu War. More than 3,000 Zulus fought against around 150 British troops stationed in Rorke's Drift. The Anglo-Zulu War had just started, and the Zulus were winning. A small force split off from the main one and were headed in the direction of Rorke's Drift. The British at Rorke's Drift, under Lieutenants John Chard and Gonville Bromhead, were using the drift area as a supply store and an area to treat the wounded. Once they heard Zulus were on the way, they decided to fortify and attempt to fight them off despite being obviously outnumbered. The film is a recreation of these events, with Stanley Baker playing Chard and introducing Michael Caine as Bromhead. Upon release, the film was a critical and commercial success that launched Caine's career and also sparked an interest in the Anglo-Zulu War, along with spawning a sequel in the form of Zulu Dawn a few years later. Having watched it recently, Zulu is a great film with good characters and excellent setup, along with a well-depicted siege in the second half. However, there are some caveats, none of which concern the structure of the film, but rather how some things are handled. I'll talk about all of it, don't you worry. The film has a good introduction showing hundreds of British lying dead in a view that is reminiscent of Glasgow after any of their sports teams win anything. This is after the Battle of Isand Lowana, where the British were utterly trounced by what they perceived as an inferior force. A small force then splits off from here after taking some rifles off the bodies and heads towards Rorke's Drift, where the British are stationed. Back at the main Zulu camp, a mating dance is occurring under the view of the chief, or king, I'm going to go with king, and two Christian missionaries. This scene is interesting, you don't really get a lot of dialogue, it's mainly just visuals. It's some kind of wedding dance or a mating dance of some kind, I think, just by looking at it. However, for the time, this was quite something. It would have been very easy for this British-made movie to focus entirely on the British perspective, but the fact it opens with a glimpse into Zulu culture is interesting and eye-opening for a 1960s audience. And this is the first point of praise I'll give to Zulu. This is by no means the only time this happens, but to start the film not focused on the British, but rather the quote-unquote enemies of the British, is a significant mix-up, made even more so by the fact that this was a real event. Props to the filmmakers for taking this angle when it would have been much, much easier on them and the audience to just start and end from the British angle. It's interrupted by a Zulu informing the king that they've won a great victory and they're now at war, which prompts the two white missionaries to get the F out of Dodge. When a Zulu man prevents the women from getting on the carriage, the king orders him killed. He is then promptly killed, and the two missionaries leave. Once again, showing that the king is merciful and not immediately hostile to these two clearly trusted individuals is an honest and respectful depiction. It would have been cartoonish if he just immediately ordered both of them be executed, and they probably could have gotten away with it considering the time. But they didn't do that. Props, once again. And we're only a couple minutes in. We're then with the Royal Engineers stationed at Rorke's Drift under Chard, where Bromhead also arrives. Between them, almost immediately you can tell they're very different men. Chard's in the water, sleeves rolled up like a manly man of manliness, and Bromhead's on his horse with his cape, like some kind of camp primary school magician. It's not long until they hear of the incoming force, and when they hear of it, Chard decides to hold position and defend the station, much to the dismay of the missionaries who have arrived, and Bromhead, who is confused and maybe even a little afraid. They're both stubborn and bullish, but over the events of the film they learn to rely on each other. Bromhead loosening up a lot and showing his worth by taking a rifle and giving his saber. Again, it would have been easy to depict Bromhead, the more aristocratic lieutenant, as brash, snobby, and all that, and he is these things, I suppose, but he proves his salt. He gets involved, and he and Chard reach an understanding by the climax. Props to get the audience on side with someone they'd probably also like to give a swirly to. The battle itself is remarkably well done. The British are showing preparing by putting their Henry Martini rifles into triangles for a bit of violent Jenga, I presume. Then when the Zulus approach, it's said they're testing the British firepower. They come in waves, even taking potshots at the Brits from above with the stolen Martini rifles. They make ever more encroaching advances into the station before being repelled. The last stand of volley fire from the 3 British ranks is a devastating blow that causes the Zulu bodies to just pile up. It's a true spectacle, and as with Waterloo, I wonder if a very contained story like this could even be done nowadays, instead of making a grand sweeping epic costing 89 trillion cojones and a weepy handjob. However, the film isn't flawless. In fact, it has one very glaring issue, and that's to do with the character of Hook. In the film, Hook is a scoundrel, a criminal, and a drinker, skipping out on duty in the hospital, and stating that he doesn't want to wear the uniform of the Redcoat. In reality, Hook was actually a model soldier, teetotal. This raises the question of why the filmmakers decided to make the portrayal of a real person involved in the event so drastically different to how he actually was. It was so significant that the relatives of Hook were reportedly disgusted with his portrayal in the film. Kind of begs the question, why didn't they just create a new character to act this way, instead of this kind of insulting method of portraying a model soldier as anything but that? All things considered, Hook is an interesting character, and his arc is a compelling one. It's just not really reflective of the real man. So take that as you will, and keep that in mind when you're watching. In terms of gripes, that's probably the biggest one I have, and it's not even related to the film's construction, it's more of an issue of respect to an individual. Everything else in Zulu is roughly as it happened, except for the singing of Men of Harlech by the British.
Stop your dreaming, can't you see their spear points gleaming? See their warrior pennons streaming to this battlefield. Sing! Men of Harlech, stand ye steady, in the Lord we.
And the song of respect the Zulus sing to the British at the very end. However, that song at the end is great for reflecting the respect the Zulus have gained for the British, as they fought valiantly throughout. Hopefully the 1960s audience respected the Zulus for what they were doing, but now it's the Zulus' turn to give respect. Once again, this didn't need to be in the film. In fact, this never actually happened in real life. This was made specifically for the movie. However, by including this scene, the filmmakers make it even clearer that the Zulus are not savage, animalistic brutes. The film has made this clear already, don't get me wrong, but the Zulus are also capable of acknowledging a worthy adversary. In terms of respecting the event, aside from the little niggle of Hook in the background, Zulu is a masterclass in how to portray an event like the Battle of Rorke's Drift. And an even greater achievement in depicting a very different culture in a time where it would have been much easier to just show them as savages, and we the Brits as the cookie-clean good folks spreading our hot loads of empire. Watch Waterloo first to understand the true value in representing a significant historical event, but then watch Zulu to see this also, with the added bonus of understanding that, even though it was made nearly 60 years ago, it was decades ahead of its time.